My name is Janine Donnelly. I am the manager of webinars for IBM System Magazine, and I will be the moderator for today's event. Today's webinar, Next Generation Interface for DB2, DBAs, and Developers, is sponsored by BMC Software. Our featured speakers today are Phil Granger and Jim Kurtz. Phil is lead product manager at BMC in support of their DB2 tools. Phil has 30 years of experience in DB2 from version 1.2 to DB2 11. From a DBA for the largest user of DB2 at that time in the UK, through his time at Platinum Technology and his senior principal product manager role for CA, Phil has always supported user groups. Phil has been honored by IBM as an information champion from 2009 to 2016. Jim has worked in IT and DB2 for over 35 years as a DBA and software consultant. Jim joined BMC Software in 1995 in that role and is responsible for providing the pre- and post-sales support for BMC's DB2 products. Today, Jim and Phil will share a truly next-generation interface for DB2 for the next generation of DB2 users. With our introductions complete, Phil, I will turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Janine, and hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, and a special hello to the handful of people out there I see that I've known for years. It's nice to know that my 30 years experience of DB2 is mirrored in some of your experiences as well. We're going to do almost like a three-part presentation over the next hour. I want to do some scene setting up front about the world that we live in today, and that's very different to the world I started 30 years ago. Jim is then going to take over and do a demo for us of some of the key aspects of Workbench for DB2, and then we'll wrap up at the end, as Janine and Connie said, with a Q&A session. So you can either give us those questions on the phone later on, or put the questions in the Q&A window on your screen, and we can take them as we go through. So, the world has changed. In 2015, every mobile customer, an average mobile customer, made around 37 transactions a day on their mobile device. And that doesn't mean 37 transactions happen back on the mainframe, because a lot of what you do, if you've been shopping on Amazon or eBay or anything like that, you will probably understand that every little thing you do inflates on the back end. So maybe one little transaction that you thought you started maybe gives 10 or 15 or 20 system interactions. And the experts tell us that by the end of 2017, that average of 37 transactions a day will be up to around 50 transactions a day. And in total, maybe making 200, 2,000, 5,000 system interactions back on wherever that back end is. And for a lot of people, that back end is a mainframe. Now, it might seem strange to mention that, because people will know if I buy something from eBay, eBay doesn't run on a mainframe, so why am I even mentioning eBay? But of course, if you buy something on eBay, you have to pay for it at some point, and you'll pay for it either with a bank transfer or with a credit card transaction. And chances are your bank runs your banking on the mainframe. Your credit card company probably runs your credit card account on the mainframe. So there's all these peripheral things going on. Just because you buy a birthday gift for your mum, or you paid for lunch with one of these little swipey things you can do on your phone now, it still probably has an impact back on the mainframe. So the mainframe is very much affected by this digital world. And that's compounded by the fact that we all know that getting on for 3/4 of mainframe companies' data is System Z still. We all have distributed applications, distributed systems, distributed databases, but the significant majority of the data is still sitting in System Z. And over half of enterprise applications in some way or another still touch that mainframe data. They have to, because that's the data of record, or the system of record. And a figure from, I think this one came from IBM, over 90% of new client-facing apps will still require access to System Z data. So although the world will tell us that the mainframe is old-fashioned technology, most of us on this call will understand that it isn't. It still underpins a lot of work that people are doing on their business. It underpins what their business is doing. The problem is, as we've come into this world, customers are demanding more. They want things to be available every hour of every day. They want things to be rapid response. Gone are the days when customers expected your business to be running from 9 o'clock in the morning until maybe 6 p.m. in the evening for 5 days of the week, maybe a shorter working time on a Saturday, and then Sunday everybody takes the day off. The digital world doesn't work that way. The digital world is 24/7, underlined in capital letters. And also, we've got growing and unpredictable transaction volumes. A lot of us used to know when our peak was for our online day. Nowadays, people have peaks in very strange places. We were talking at BMC to one of the major banks in Europe, and they said that their online banking peak is now late on a Sunday evening, early on a Monday morning. And it took them a while to figure out what was going on until they thought, well, maybe our customers had a really, really good weekend, and they're just trying to figure out on Monday morning, first thing, have they got any money left after the weekend? So they never saw a peak on a Sunday evening / Monday morning coming. And as we build more and more applications, we get more and more data to cope with them. So our data volumes are growing. We're getting objects that are becoming too big to manage. We've got new data types like large objects. So the DB2 that I started work with all those years ago, and I just realized when Janine was reading out my bio, I need to update my bio. I can't say 30 years experience of DB2 anymore. It's way too many years. I need to make that somehow more vague. The one thing that is interesting and brings us into why we're all here today is the retirement of people like me and the replacement of people like me by younger people. We're all trying to bring in new staff. We've got to figure out how we do that and how they react and how they live in our mainframe world, because people like me are thinking about retiring or thinking about maybe part-time work. Let's do a partial retirement. We have a number of people at BMC who are starting to wind down their hours. Instead of working 5-day weeks, they maybe work a 3-day week instead. So those people are not around for 40% of your working week. And our application environments are getting way more complicated than they ever used to be. I mean, when I started, an application environment was some CICS transactions and DB2 data back on DB2. There's so many different pieces of that puzzle now between the data and your end user. But mainframes are not going anywhere. Mainframes are definitely here to stay. They power some of the world's biggest businesses. They power some of the world's most successful businesses. So all those reports, and this goes way back into the 1990s, when people were saying that mainframes are going to die, it's time for us all to look for some new work, new business. It's not happening that way at all. But companies do have some issues, because although they might be a mainframe-centric business, a lot of their application development is not happening in the ZOS world. If you're building apps for an iPhone or a Surface or a tablet, you're developing in a completely different environment to ZOS. You've also probably got a lot of developers who are not familiar with an ISPF environment. And even if you showed them an ISP environment, they would probably run a mile rather than trying to use it. So even where they are processing mainframe data and accessing mainframe data from DB2, they probably have no interest in working directly with the mainframe. So we have a bit of an impasse. We have these young people with their graphically enabled world, and we need to help them access data that is stored in a very non-graphical world. So we've got the young people coming in. Trying to teach these people an ISPF interface is just not going to work. We need to find a better way of bringing the work they need to do and the information they need to do that work together in a way that they're going to find more acceptable and certainly easier to learn. So we're going to talk about Workbench for DB2. It's secure self-service is the way we've described it. So we're streamlining our workflows, and we'll talk a little bit later about workflows and user personas, and use a browser-based interface into the power of the BMC tools back on the mainframe. So it brings you the simplicity of point, click, drag, right click, you name it, all the things that we do now almost in our sleep, and supports that generation of developers that expect an environment to be that way. But it gives them insight into the DB2 information and brings the power of the tools that we've developed over the last 25 to 30 years at BMC to a user who has no interest in a character-based interface. And you'll see some examples as Jim goes through the demo of how we've simplified a lot of the complex things that go on in our heritage tools to bring that information and that data to the people. I just want to introduce you to this diagram briefly because it might help to put some things in context. Across the bottom, where I've got a thing called base functionality, is really the foundation for Workbench. So there's a significant number of things you can do with Workbench that have no relation to what tools you might have licensed back on the mainframe. So regardless of what you have licensed from BMC, running Workbench for you, you will see everything in that green box. And Jim will pick out a couple of these when he goes through the demo. On the top of that, we then expand that base functionality depending on what tools you have licensed back on the mainframe. So if you have our object administration solution, for example, you will get some additional administration functionality. If you've got performance for databases or performance for SQL, you will get some additional performance information or performance tuning things you can do. So what we're trying to do and what the whole planning was behind Workbench was to graphically enable the things you need to do. We're not one by one graphically enabling individual products. That would be too long a project, and it wouldn't bring benefit to you, the user. So what we're trying to do is put ourselves in the user's shoes, think about what information a particular type of user would like to see. We will bring that to you regardless of which product on the back end that information comes from. And just as an example, we've recently added some recovery functionality to Workbench. This is brand new, but you can see straight away we've taken that, well, for some of us, that familiar black and green 3270 screen, and we can do far more in a graphic environment with things like traffic lights, graphical imagery, to make it far more clear. What this screen is trying to show you is I've got some recovery set up. I've got an application defined. Is my application actually recoverable in the time frame available? It's a little bit small on the screen, but what those two red triangles and green circle are actually telling you is you have 3 different recovery options. 2 of them are not going to be able to recover your data in the time you've told us you have. Only one of those 3 options is actually a workable solution to your recovery problem. So that's enough time for me to set the scene. Probably the most interesting part for the audience is going to be actually seeing Workbench in progress. So I'd like to hand over to Jim Kurtz at this point. And Jim, let's go to the demo.
Sounds great, Phil. Thanks a lot, and welcome, everyone. As Phil said, my name is Jim Kurtz. I'm a software consultant at BMC for the DB2 product line, and my role is technical pre- and post-sales for BMC customers in the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States. So today, I'm going to demonstrate BMC's Workbench for DB2 to you. Workbench is a browser-based tool for use on ZOS DB2 systems. It is suitable for use by both developers and DBAs. You do not need to know how to use TSO or ISPF to use Workbench. So as I said, Workbench is a browser-based tool. There's no client-side software to maintain. So let's start by entering the Workbench URL into a browser and logging on. As you can see here, I already have one up and running, but let me demonstrate to you how that would work. We'll open a new tab here and just paste in this particular URL, and you will get the login screen for Workbench. In this case, I'm going to use my existing TSO ID and password and log in.
So although we don't need access to TSO, Jim, we do need a TSO ID, right? And that's to do with security, maybe?
Exactly. You can get by with a basic RACF ID and password. It does not have to be tied into TSO whatsoever. So the first thing I wanted to show you here is on the left-hand side. It's what we call the Workspace Manager area. It's on the far left of the screen. All work done inside of Workbench is done in what we call Workspace. And you can create a workspace, you can copy workspaces, but a workspace is essentially a customizable set of perspectives which can contain one or more views. As long as you periodically save the workspace, all of your perspectives will persist across sessions. So for example, as I'm right now going to be using the webinar new perspective, or I should say workspace, and inside of that I have already saved a number of views or perspectives, if you will, of work and demos that I want to show you here today. So with that said, I'm going to move you to the right and bring your attention to the tree structures. You can see I have started off with two basic subsystems. These are DIA, DJJ. As you can roll over, you get some information. This is a version 10 subsystem. This is version 11. Click on the arrow and expand them, and you can see it's essentially a tree structure. It's in what we call the Navigator tab right here. And you would use this area to add object views, perform basic DB2 catalog navigation, issue commands, etc. The Workbench functionality is driven by both on-screen icons as well as right-click options on your mouse. So to get started, I'm going to pull up, and again, I can add, this is how you would add a new object view. So just to kind of show you real quick, if I wanted to bring up let's just say indexes. All indexes, I can give it a wildcard name, and this will actually create a list of all the indexes that start with my creator ID. So there is, and from this point, you can do a variety of actions, as I'm going to show you here with the table. I'm going to stick to a very simple table. We all, as you can see, I already predefined this object view right here, but a very simple table in the sample database. You all might be familiar with the one called department. So there's highlighted on the right-hand side the department table. Now, as I said a minute ago, you can navigate. You have the icons up here that would let me navigate to other related objects. I have commands I can perform against that table. And off to the right here, I have some tasks and additionally some views that we can bring into play. The same can be gotten with a right click. I happen to be a right click oriented person. So for example, let's just pull up some information you might say about the related objects on this. So in this case, these are all the various objects taking me to the related object screen. And at this point, I could then say, there's my table. Well, let's pull up all of the indexes on that table. Let's look at the key columns on that particular index. So on and so forth. You can use these icons to perform all of those activities. And what you may be noticing on the left-hand side, additional items are filling in over here on the tree structure as I've clicked on the related objects. So again, we're just going to go back to department because I'm going to go with the right-click method for example a second here and show you that we are able to issue commands such as display. Now there's the syntax of the display. Okay, but let's actually hit the run button and execute that. And there's the results. So you may notice something has happened. I was operating in the Navigator tab. I've automatically been moved to the Scratchpad tab. There's the original text. It's editable. I can change that. I can re-execute it to be whatever I want, and the output will show up here. So again, displays are possible. Starts, stops, again, get you a list of them right here. Displays, starts, stops, drops, all the commands. Now, I'd like to point out that these commands and a couple of other ones I'm going to show you here in a minute are, they will only use the inherent security of the person that's performing this task. It does not give you superpowers. So if you don't have the ability to choose stop, starts, displays, it will not give them to you. It operates off your native or your native DB2 privilege set that is under your ID. But back to commands for a second. Some people are like the DDL command. And once again, DDL, all the creates for this particular object, and then in this case, there's RI on this table, so we will alter the RI onto the table with the alter statements after it is created. You can take this, edit it, and run it. Okay, obviously this particular table already exists, but you could come in here and essentially create a Department 2 table, go down and do the alters, or maybe not even put the RI on that table, but if you were just trying to quickly generate DDL and run and create a new table, you could do that here. Again, presuming you have the authority to create tables.
And again, assuming you have the authority, I guess you can suck the DDL out of one subsystem and run it against a completely different subsystem.
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, if you were to, I'm not going to make the change here, Phil, but if you wanted to run this, it's actually going to prompt you as to which DB2 you want to run in. I built the DDL in the DJJ system, but I could connect to the DIA system and execute that. But I will cancel out of that and move back again to the DB2 Navigator. I want to show you a couple more features about HDDL. Some of you may be familiar with the concept of a HDDL command, essentially hierarchical DDL. So in this case, H means hierarchical, so it's going to grab the DDL for the targeted object and everything below it in the DB2 hierarchy. You do get to control that. I happen to have a Y setting for all of the subordinate objects here. So in this case, you'll see the table, the indexes, the alters for the RI, and you'll notice that in this particular case, the alters are commented just in case you do not have the related tables already created. Excuse me. So with that, let's again go back over here to Department and navigate down to some other capabilities such as select. You'll notice the DML statements, your select, insert, update, and delete. The DDL statements, I should say. In this case, we're just going to run a select statement. Again, if you have authority to this select statement is pre-formatted for you. You can modify it to meet your needs. You can add predicates to it, but you can then run it. As we all know, the department table is very small in the sample database, so there's not a lot of data here, but you would get back all the data you could possibly retrieve given the amount of memory you have for your session. And then there are a couple what I want to call cool capabilities here because we're in a GUI interface. I can basically say select all at this point, and I could copy that. And that's now on my clipboard. I could open an Excel spreadsheet and paste that in if that's the manner in which you like to work. Another one is here to do an export on the data. And what this is going to do is it's going to put this into a comma separated value file and save it so then I could import it into a spreadsheet or just move it around to another application that requires comma separated values. So again, flexibility that you might have in terms of creating test data, altering the data, and moving it from one subsystem to another. So something you wouldn't necessarily be able to do that quickly and easily in a traditional ISPF-based system. So up to this point, we've been handling what I would call functions and activities that are more or less done every day by DBAs and developers, and the type of thing that a developer could sometimes perform on their own and offload from a DBA. But now I'd like to take you into an area where it's actually something that might be more DBA specific, and that would be the tasks of doing alters on tables. If you notice down here the tasks I have available to me on alter and compare schema. I'll get into migrate stats in a minute, but the idea I want to show you is that if I can do a simple alter on this table, and then I can also use this tool to compare schemas or compare objects in two different environments. So before I get into the details of that, let me show you this particular, let's go to the columns. You'll notice department is a 5-column table over here on subsystem DJJ. I also happen to have a department table on subsystem DIA. It's also 5 columns. Okay, as we know, and this is very simplistic, but as we know, sometimes in very complicated environments, objects where we think they're in sync. Sometimes they tend to get out of sync. So I want to show you two activities that you can use Workbench to do, one being the alter, but the other being the compare. You don't have to have an alter preceding your compare, but in this case it helps me show you both of those capabilities. So let's do an alter to the columns. I'm going to add a column. We're just going to call it the manager number 2 column, okay? Something very simple. And we're going to make it character 6, just as the original manager is. We're going to do an OK on that. Okay, so it sits down the bottom here. We're going to generate the alter DDL. Fairly straightforward, right? Nothing crazy there. Let's run it. Let's run the DDL. So you come down here and you'll notice the alter was completed. Let's click on that. It'll tell us alter executed, return code 0. So I know seeing is believing. So let's go back to my navigator and refresh this and then pull up the columns. And you'll notice I now have a manager number 2 column at the end of my department table. So you now have tables that are out of sync. Well, wouldn't it be nice if I could identify that and then possibly generate some DDL-like statements that could be used to bring them into sync? Okay, so in that case, the way you would do this, again, we'll go back to the department table. Sorry about that. Here we go. And we're going to task our way over to comparing schemas. So comparing schemas, we're just going to call this 1. Next. I'm actually going to fill in this field here and write the comparison results into a member of a PDS that I have on the mainframe. That's right. So, and I will touch on that with you in a little bit, but in this case, the reason I'm doing this is because it's going to generate a more verbose result set for me, and I want you to see that. So this is a member in that PDS, and by the way, if I wanted to have browsed my way onto the mainframe, I could have done that with the magnifying glass, but again, I'll show that to you in a little bit. So in this case, you'll notice we're going to do a very simple compare between the department tables on the two environments, and this first one is basically saying, please show me the DB2 objects that do not have the desired structure. Okay, do not. So let's just say we know department on DIA is back leveled, so they do not have it. But DJJ, where I just made that change, that's the one that do have the desired structure. They're the way I want it to be on DIA. I'm going to be, again, very simple here. You can wildcard this. You can do multiple tables at one time. You can do database level comparisons, in fact. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a comparison between DJJ, which is where we have the additional column on that table. DIA does not have it. I'm going to deselect everything just to keep it simple and only compare tables. Okay? And finish. In this particular case, we should wind up saying, you know, everything's in sync except I have a new column. So I'm expecting to see something along the lines of an alter add a new column to the table in DIA, schema management. Took a minute to build. So here we have a number of reports that you can view and tabs you can go into, and you can see the name of it, where the compare report went to, the data structures that we compared. Again, it's going to bring everything back to you. In this case, we essentially have one. We have an alter, because what happens in reality when you do a compare, you're going to fall into one of three categories. You're going to either find a match, and there's going to be differences in it, and that's our situation, or you're going to find it on one side where it's not on the other. That's going to result in a create, or vice versa, and that's going to result in a drop. So because we have literally one alter We'll get this big pie chart saying that's all we have. But the point I wanted to show you is up in the what we call the CDL. CDL stands for Change Definition Language. It is a construct of another BMC product called Change Manager. So for those of you that may be familiar with that, this is where you would take this particular PDS member and import it into Change Manager. Okay, currently that functionality resides only on our traditional mainframe-based way of using our products. It is not in the Workbench at this time, but this is the bridge that would get you allow you to complete the process of syncing up these two tables. As I scroll down here, again, for those of you that aren't familiar, the comments are asterisks in the first column, and dashes are actually functional information to be performed by Change Manager. But you'll notice the CDL, the -CDL command that I have right here, is basically the work and the delta between those two. So remember, the department table that was in the lower environment, the DIA, did not have the second manager column in it. So this is the syntax that you would import into that subsystem to make it look like the department table up in the higher environment. So again, alter that table, add column manager 2 after the location column, and there's the attributes of that column. So in essence, you have identified a delta. You don't have to pursue making them in sync. You don't have to take this to the next level and actually use the CDL up on the mainframe product. You can simply use this tool as a way to identify what is different between any two environments, and you don't have to do it at a one-to-one level. You can do it at a very high, like a database level, to compare your environments. Okay, so let's move on now to see how Workbench can help with SQL performance, and in particular, tuning a given SQL statement. Notice there's the tab up there in performance, but I want to take you back over to Navigator. I tend to drive a lot of my activities from Navigator. You can drive them from within the particular tab where we're going to eventually wind up. But in this case, I like to reinforce the idea that Navigator, the tree structure, it's a great tool for just drilling into your DB2 catalog. So I'm going to stay up here in subsystem DJJ. I'm going to come down and I'm going to show you packages. So I'm going to bring up all the packages in this particular collection. And one of my buddies here has been pretty busy building up some packages for us to use. And in particular, this one right here, the CRBMC-PK package. Well, first, before I get into showing you the statements in there, again, I want to illustrate that we have icons up here that'll let you navigate to related objects. We have commands. And again, we'll have this one over here, this explainable statement, which is very cool. But in this case, I like to right-click and show you the commands. You notice I can do bind, rebind, and free. So I just wanted to, again, I wanted to show you that we can do the binds, the rebinds, and the frees in addition to navigating to all the related objects. Okay, but in the interest of time, and again, what this would do is it would generate the actual bind, rebind, free syntax. You would then click on the arrow to run that in real time and make that appropriate change. But in the interest of time, I want to show you how we can actually view what we call the explainable statements right here in this particular package. Oh, what's that about? Maybe a dozen particular statements, maybe 15. I've pre-selected a couple of statements here that are going to be good at illustrating some really cool features of Workbench that I think are both, and again, once you're into doing SQL tuning, you're probably dealing with both developers and DBAs, right? So it depends on your shop as to who gets to do all that fun kind of stuff. But I'm going to show you right here on statement 771, for example, how simple it is for me to come in, right-click on this and view the explain for this particular statement. Okay, so the explain results can come back to you either in this hierarchical approach, or we can bring it down into just a text-based view of things. You'll notice we have a couple of icons indicate the severity. There are a number of predefined rules that come into play here. And those rules are out-of-the-box rules that will tell you certain warnings or information as well as some severe type messages. And they're customizable by you for your environment. You can tweak the severity up or down. You can eliminate the rule entirely if you so desire. But in this particular case, there's a number of tabs. Let me just go over them real quick with you. There's the original SQL statement. Okay, these are the indexes. If there was an index being used, it is checked down the bottom here. So this particular index is being used. Okay, there's the explain. Here's the cost. And again, notice we have some informational messages right here. The predicates, we are doing an equal on this primary key B column. Related objects. Let's take a look here real quick and see at the indexes. Where are my indexes? Right there. So there's only a single index, and the key columns in that index, it looks like it's a 3-column index. It looks like it's only joining on the B, the second column in that SQL. Is that correct? Yes. So being the knowledgeable person you are about this, you know that you could probably, if the application would permit it, you could probably get away with adding another predicate in here. So this is how simple it is to do that. Let's just click on the what if. Let's come in and edit this statement, come to the end, just say where I'm going to join on both columns in that predicate. So now I'm joining on the first 2 of the 3 columns. A is going to have a host variable, and so is B. And in this case, we're going to re-explain this particular statement. And you may notice from the pane on the left-hand side here, before I click on cost, that it's gone all the way down from 11.05 to 0.04 in terms of its cost. Okay, it is using the same index in a different fashion, however. So let's go figure out, notice on the predicates I'm now using both the A and the B column. Let's go look at the compare and see what's happening. So on the left-hand side, I free-filled on this left pane the number 1, the improved statement, right? So on the right-hand side, let's go get the original. You'll notice there's a big asterisk here because this is going to point out what's different between the two. If I click on the asterisk, we'll get the differences. Not only is the cost difference, not only did it go from 11.04 down to 0.04, but you'll notice that I've gone from matching on 0 columns to 2 columns on that index. And down the bottom here, I've gone from a dynamic prefetch to nothing. So a couple of improvements, obviously very simplistic example, but the messaging here is to get you to understand how easy it is to make a change to a statement, re-explain it, and then being able to visually see the differences. Having said that, I want to go back to my navigator. I want to pull up statement 553 because sometimes we really need to make more than a simple statement change, right? We've identified a SQL statement where there's primary key A is, we know, again, we've just looked at this index, and we know that's good, but we have a customer last name here that may, you know the entire application, you might say to yourself, this statement might benefit from an index on last name. Obviously, maybe last name's not the best idea in the world for putting on an index on, but for the case of this discussion, I wanted to illustrate to you that it is as easy to play what if a new index as it was to what if a changed state. With that said, I'm going to come up and create a what if scenario, but you notice I have an indexes tab now. So not only can I change the statement text if I wanted to, but I could come over and I could, here's my existing index, I could actually copy that and make changes to the copy. I could edit the existing index, or in our case, I'm just going to add a new one. Again, just to show you how simple it is to add a new one. Adding a new index, going to the next step, going to use the last name as the primary key, a single column. I'm just going to fudge up some cardinality values here, and we will finish. So you'll notice I have a demo 1 index added to the list of available indexes. This time I'll come up and I'll click on and explain. And again, you can see in the left-hand pane already what has happened. before I hit the cost button here. But I have dropped the cost from 59.84 down to 0.27. Okay, you notice the predicates have, I didn't show you this prior, but we're now looking at values for both primary key A as well as customer last name. If I go to the Compare tab, there's my new and improved. Let's pull up the original. And you can see it's no longer using the original index. It's using the one with the last name in it instead. And if we scroll down, we'll see we went from sequential prefetch to nothing. And we will always have changes in the bind times, explain times. But in this particular case, it was the prefetch that changed, and the cost went down because it liked that index better. Now, obviously, you don't need to have as many indexes as there are columns in a query. This is not meant to propose that, but it's actually trying to show you that you can do a what if index very quickly, very dynamically to test your theory as to whether an index will or will not work. I mean, with that said, there's a number of other things that can help out with SQL tuning, and one of them will take me back to my particular department table. And this is the idea of stats migration. I'm sure over the years you've toyed with or used the concept of moving statistics from one subsystem to another so that you can have the stats in from let's say the production subsystem to the subsystem where you're actually doing your performance analysis. Well, Workbench will facilitate that. The manner in which you would do that is, again, there's going to be a task. As I mentioned earlier, it's going to be under Migrate Stats. And we're going to migrate stats from the department table up here in DJJ down to here in DIA. I guess the only way I can prove this to you before and after would be to show you the department columns, the columns from systables for department right now. You notice the this is going to be my target. Stats time, where are you? Stats time, January 5th, right? And the target. And if I come up here, so when I migrate them, it's going to change. It's going to take on the current time, because what we've done is we've made this very transparent, so you don't actually have a two-step process. You don't have any SQL statements to view before it actually happens. So we're going to view from DJJ. From DJJ, we're going to go into DIA. Say next. And this is where you could actually pick the various subordinate objects. So I have department, I have the indexes on department, and I actually have the table spaces. And should the names need to change over here, there are ways in which you can alter the target names. No changes, because I do have them named identically on both subsystems. So I'm going to hit next. It's done. Okay, it actually happened. So actually, no, this is great. Great point here. I forgot about this one. But in this particular case, you'll notice the manager number 2 column, there was an error on that, right? Because we don't have stats on that column. So that caused an error to occur in for that particular column. The indexes and the table space stats migrated correctly. So again, that's because we added a column name onto department in the source, and it didn't exist in the target. So that particular stats for that table did not get migrated. But anyway, caught myself on that one. This is something, though, that can help in your SQL tuning.
And actually, while we're sitting on this, Jim, there's something else I quite like about Workbench is the way that when it asks you which DB2 subsystems you want to talk to, you don't have to know where they are. Unlike logging onto TSO or submitting a batch job, you have to be in the right place. All you care about with Workbench is what DB2 do you want, and we'll figure out where it is and how to connect to it.
Yeah, that's correct. Everything is going to be, all those various concerns, connections are going to be done during the installation, and it's all going to be tied together on the back end, so to speak, through the address spaces that are talking to the appropriate DB2s. Exactly. So I'd like to take you back to one final part here, and that will be what we call file locator and job browser. So for those of you that do have experience with TSO and ISPF and would like to still have access to those data sets so you can submit jobs and view the output, I just want to demonstrate those two areas of Workbench. In this particular case, I added a data set filter. So essentially a wildcard, if you will, similar to what you would do over in 3.4. I just toggled back to my 3.4 because I want you guys to see. There's my data set. Okay, so I'm going to come over here I'm going to right-click and say open that control data set. He's going to bring up a member list. Well, there it is. It already happened. There's the member list. All the members. I'm just going to show that to you here as well. Same list, right? What's the first thing we do? We want to find out where we left off. You sort changed. So over here I can sort on modify date. Notice there's fix 1, fix 1x, quy s2. Same thing over here. But let's say you want to actually edit that member. There it is. It's again, we took the member, we moved it to the scratch pad. You can submit this job from here, much like you could do this and type submit. I'm going to submit this job. Execution's in progress, run completed. Okay, well this went into the internal reader, okay, and that's just again some messages to indicate that it's done that. But this job is running, okay, or has already run. As you can see, it was a very simple job just to illustrate the point of pulling up some JCL and running it. I now want to take you over to the job browser. I have pre-built a filter to pull up anything under my job name. So when I click on that, you'll notice I just had another one enter the queue here, and that would be this job here, 19613. But I know you want me to show that to you over here. They just ended. I know you want me to show that to you over here in SDSF. So there it is. There are 3 jobs there, just like there are 3 jobs here, plus my TSO ID that's running. So I'm going to click on this, view the details. It's broken into 4 sections, much like it's broken into the sections here. So you can next through the sections, okay? And over here, that's exactly how they would work here. You would go through those to see the parts of the output. Again, for those of you that have an investment on your mainframe data sets and so forth, you can still get to those data sets here. You can submit jobs, you can run the jobs. Having said that, I would like to thank you, and if you have any questions as we finish up on this webinar, do not hesitate to ask them, and from that we'll head back to Phil Granger.
Go through my closing slides fairly quickly to make sure we do have time to cover some of those questions. I talked a little bit about personas earlier on, and this is just to stress that because we're graphically enabling kind of workflows, we're thinking, as I said, about how people use the products. And you'll notice as Jim went through the demo, we never went and said, this is from this product, this is from that product. We're hiding the complexity of what goes on behind the scenes so that all you need to worry about is what is it I'm trying to achieve and what am I trying to do, not worrying about how do I do it. This is one area that we think is quite important as the skill level changes of the people who are working in our mainframe environment. We're going to lose a lot of the highly skilled technical people who know the ins and outs, the bits and the bytes of DB2, and we're going to find ourselves with people who understand what the business needs, who understands what they need to do from, what the data is, what's important, how we present it, and not want to get buried in the minutiae of everything else. A couple of other things I want to talk about. As you can imagine, Workbench is going to become pretty central to everything we're doing at BMC. We're looking at how we deliver new functionality. One thing we haven't really touched on is the fact that it's our aim to bring out new function to Workbench 3 or 4 times each year. We're not looking at the usual 18-month or 2-year waterfall type of release cycle. We want to be a lot more continuous, to use the current buzzword, and make sure that what we deliver to you. And this also comes back to the importance of this being a browser-based interface. There is, as Jim mentioned, nothing to install on the local PC. Everything is installed back on the mainframe. All the user needs to use Workbench is the URL of that back-end piece of code that it needs to talk to. So as you apply maintenance to the back-end, as you introduce new functionality, it's instantly available to every user you have. It doesn't matter whether you have 5 users of Workbench or 505 users of Workbench. You don't have to do anything to their local PC to change the version of Workbench they're using. It's all done at the back end. And what we're also finding as we put more and more functionality into Workbench, that even the dyed-in-the-wool ISPF fans who told us in no uncertain terms 2 or 3 years ago when we started on this journey that they would never relinquish ISPF, and if we gave them a GUI, they would walk away. They're already recognizing that the GUI makes the thing much simpler to do. You don't have to remember all the different line commands. You don't have to remember all the different screens you have to PF3 through. You just work with the GUI, and things just become easy. Things just become much simpler. So in summary, what you've seen today is primarily towards DBAs, application developers, because that's where we are currently with our journey into Workbench. But we're going to continue adding functionality, continue to think about the people that are using it. I talked at the beginning about some of the recovery and recovery estimation that we're putting in, support for some of the unique features that BMC has around its recovery tools. So the aim is all the while to increase productivity for everybody, not just the system DBA, not just the application developer, but everybody that needs to access DB2 as part of their daily job. And not losing sight of the fact that if we make this thing too cumbersome to install or too cumbersome to upgrade, it doesn't matter how much value we deliver to you, it's no use. You know, as I said, if you've got 505 users of Workbench and every one of them has to have something installed on their local PC, doing an upgrade to a new version becomes an absolute nightmare. That's why we went down the browser-based route to make things simple for you. So I'd like to wrap up the presenting part of the webinar at this point. And if I can hand things back to you, Janine, I'm sure we have some questions that have come in during the last 50 minutes.
We do. Let's kick it off. First question, can I debug SQL stored procedures in Workbench? And then a little bit here. In other words, can I place breakpoints into a stored procedure through the logic in a stored procedure and not simply just run a stored procedure?
Okay, that is a good question. Currently within Workbench, yes, you do have the ability to run a stored procedure, but we don't yet have the ability to do sort of breakpoint debugging of it, something that is on our list of things to look into. I've made a note down of the person who did ask that question, so we might take that up with him and look more detail about what it is his actual requirement is.
Okay. Next question. When I compare two objects, can I mask any of the attributes? So we have copy attribute turned on for several indices on production while it's turned off on test. Would I be able to compare these and see if they're the same?
That's probably a better question for Jim Kurtz, actually, if I just talk for a couple of words while he unmutes himself. To take that one, Jim?
Yeah, actually, you do have the ability to turn off certain attributes. The copy attribute is not one of them, but there are other attributes. So, you know, that you can, the pry quantity, set quantity, stow group, things of that nature that you would not want to have, that you don't care about comparing, but the one you're asking about is not one of them at this time.
Okay. You showed us a lot of functionality aimed at application developers. Does that mean it is only for those kind of users?
Okay, yeah, good question. It kind of looks that way because that's how Workbench started. When we started looking into graphically enable some of our functionality, we figured that that was a good target to aim at. But over time, we are starting to build more functionality in for not just application DBAs, but for system DBAs as well. And that's the direction we're going to keep taking. So although it started out live as secure self-service for application developers, it's a lot more than that now, and it will continue to grow.
Okay. Does Workbench give you the ability to set up virtual indices so you can do what-if scenarios with indices?
Do you want to take that one, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, doesn't use virtual to do that. You would be creating, as I showed you in the demo, you would be creating the what-if scenario on what you think would be the appropriate index that may work for you, and then you would validate that, you know, through an additional explain for that particular statement. So in essence, it's not using virtual indexes. We're actually creating a separate set of objects that don't interfere with the original, and we're actually writing that temporarily for the duration of the explain. So
I don't know if that's exactly the same if you're using virtual indices specifically, or just kind of, relatively speaking.
Yeah, it's actually a good answer because we're virtualizing within our own environment. If we were to use IBM's virtual indexes, there are many, many things that currently doesn't support. So things like index on expression you couldn't do with a virtual index. If you wanted to do a random index, you can't do that with virtual indexes. You can do just about everything that's valid in a BMC virtualized index, if I can put it that way. Thanks, Jim.
Right.
Okay, we are approaching the top of the hour. Phil and Jim have been generous enough to provide their email address on this slide, so please feel free to reach out with additional questions, and they will make sure that they are forwarded to the appropriate people, and someone will get back to you. And that's all we have time for today. I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and I especially want to thank Phil and Jim for sharing their expertise. Later this week, we will be sending out a follow-up email with a link to a recording of today's event. Thanks again. That concludes our webinar. Have a great day.